Hey, what's up? This is Matt Markin, and welcome to the Adventures in Advising podcast. Ryan and I have had various episodes with guests discussing AI and how that relates to and impacts higher ed, especially within the academic advising realm. And this episode continues that conversation. And let me bring on our guest for today, and that is the founder of Advisor AI, and that is Arjun Arora. Arjun, how are you?
I'm doing really well, Matt. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know Advisor AI's mission, according to the website, is simple: to empower every learner with actionable pathways to achieve their boldest dreams, while ensuring educators remain central and serve as a catalyst for intentional transformation. And this, to me, is an ongoing discussion within higher ed. So really excited for this. And as we were mentioning before we started recording, I was letting you know that I almost didn't know if we were going to have this because we had where I'm at, the fire alarm went off about 25 minutes ago, and I was getting prepped for this interview. And then I was just waiting like, okay, when are we going to get the all clear to get back in? And then once we got the thumbs up, I'm trying to weave through everyone to run back upstairs just in time for this, because this is a conversation that needs to be had. So I always go by the quote, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans.
I feel like the fire alarm aspect is always back of mind when we have webinars or events that are virtual. Like, what do you tell 100 people, right?
Right, exactly.
I think
yeah, but it won't be Adventures in Advising unless I ask you this first question: to tell me your origin story.
For sure. The last 10 years I've spent on AI and data and technology implementations, really. So that's been the core part of my background, ranging from technology companies, manufacturing companies, and the last 4 or 5 years really focused on higher education. I think what's really the motivation behind Advisor AI and how my experiences informed it is twofold. Firstly, I did not see much social impact often. So, there's really good chatbots or really good technology, but who is it helping? And I always found a big disconnect there, which is there wasn't a clear impact associated with things. And on the other side, I also saw that the right advising support, a milestone-driven approach, a much more life-designed strategic way to build skills helped me move from, someone who was maybe 15, 20 years ago was afraid to ask questions to leading projects that serve millions of users, and moved into opportunities that I thought I was initially not exposed to or thought I could get into. And so I think it's driven by this dual nature of how can technology help people, but then how can also the right infrastructure, the right high quality support be made more accessible?
Gotcha. And I think let's maybe take that technology part of it, because in academic advising, let's say, it's oftentimes kind of maybe been undervalued relative to the work and effort that advising departments and advising teams put in at their institutions. In your opinion, do you believe technology can meaningfully address that type of concern?
Yeah, I think a background or context here is we have really spent close to 2-3 years doing research with advising teams. So I've had the chance to probably meet advisors from more than 200 different colleges. We've met, academic advisors, career advisors, student success leaders, administrators, as well as also students, right? So that has also been part of what has informed what we do. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the bigger insights there you're spot on with is I think there's so much work and effort that advisors are putting in managing caseloads of 1,000 students, but it's not recognized accordingly. Mm-hmm. And I think technology partly is to blame here, which is it's so complex, where so much time is spent on maybe data entry and setting up systems that time is not spent as much on the high impact or student-oriented tasks. And I think technology can also fix it from the lens of if a lot of the administrative back-end operational items can be made simpler, less busy, it can help not just the advisors be more effective, impactful in their connection and collaborations, but it can also give insight to leadership about how the role, how the profession, how the interactions are informing institutional outcomes for enrollment, graduation, workforce readiness.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, like, you've talked to so many different individuals from all various levels, including students, because you definitely want to get their opinion on stuff, but not just even just administrators, but those that are actually on the front lines doing the actual work. So I really appreciate that you've done that. Now, speaking of, like, let's say AI, this is depending on who you ask, some are like, I don't want to use it. Some are like, let's use it no matter what. It's here. It's been here. And I think some people don't realize that how long it's been around, and then also like where it's actually being used within higher education at institutions already. So I guess my question to you would be, how do you think AI is already being used within higher ed that others may not know about?
Yeah, I think I always like to step back on this question, which is, I think what I'm seeing right now a lot of is, here's AI, here's technology, let's go find a problem or an area to apply it to, which is not the most effective approach to get results from any tool. And based on like the last 10 years of me implementing a lot of similar solutions, those projects often get blocked or don't move forward. I think a better lens or approach here really is to start with, what are the areas teams are challenged with or looking to improve, right? Is it enrollment? Is it graduation outcomes? Is it integrating more workforce readiness into the curriculum? And then work backwards in a way from, what are those use cases for AI? And I think if we take that approach, there will be so many scenarios, right, that AI can be applied to. I think right now we definitely see AI can, maybe write a resume or write content for a resume, build a career plan, build an academic plan, create a checklist. I think those are now fairly common, widely used. Most teams are aware about how just most technology or tools or chatbots can help support that. I think what's maybe not as visible and what we are really seeing with partnerships right now is using AI in sort of this lens of an invisible infrastructure. So it's sort of like it's something that's happening in the background when it comes to maybe optimizing a caseload, right? Or creating a much more integrated, holistic plan that maps academic coursework, that maps career readiness milestones, that maps maybe clubs or communities Arjun should join in engineering. And so it's much more of this operational aspect that can streamline a lot of the effort students are putting in and advisors are putting in.
Yeah. I mean, all great ideas initially, but it's always that implementation part where, you might have, let's say just within an academic advisor or a career advisor, where it's like, okay, here's this new thing, now go ahead and use it. And they're like, I don't even know how to, I'm not even trained to audit. How do you go about helping like a institution or a department understand, but also be able to implement as well?
Yeah, I think what I hear very often, almost every week right now, is technology is so complex that it requires 6 or 7 weeks to train, to enter data, to show students what to use, how to use it. And then even after that, students don't engage, right? And that's partly technology and how complex it is. And it should not be made that complex, right? It should be easy in order to like figure out what to do. It should be intuitive. I think so that's perhaps a blocker that I've probably heard way too much. I think because technology should be made extremely simple is always the recommendation there.
Yeah. And I think kind of going along with that for this next question is like, I think, when I go to conferences or talk with colleagues, many of us kind of worry that when there is a new product or like, let's say an AI vendor, will they misunderstand what academic advising is and and do they see it more as information delivery rather than an actual relational practice? How would you respond to that concern?
Well, I think so. I have done a lot of self-study on advising over the last 10 years. Most of our team is also academic and career advisors, right? And I think as advising professionals or someone who understands the space deeply, we know that technology is only a part of advising or can support it. And so my recommendation there is always to push back, right? Which is to ask vendors, like, how do you meet the basic minimum requirements for advising, right? Like for career exploration, for holistic advising, for guided pathways, right? How are you actually implementing those best practices? And what are the methodologies being used at each step? So that it makes the vendors also accountable, right, about what they need to be doing versus saying, here's a chatbot, it can do advising, right? Which is so far from the truth. Like a chatbot can like help you answer questions, it can create those plans, but that's also not what advising is. Because I'll just look back at maybe 15 years or 15 years or so, 20 years. I remember my advisors from school, right? And I think I remember those interactions, experiences, the encouragement that helped me take that next step. I don't remember what laptop I used or like whether they had a chatbot or not, right? And I think we with the trends happening right now, I think we miss the context that advising is much more than just creating a course plan.
Yeah, it definitely has that human element to it. But I definitely agree with you. And like when you think back to college years or some sort of experience, you a lot of times remember that person, that interaction, good or bad, but it is a memory because of that interaction that you had versus, what was the technology that was used for it. I'm sure you get this question too, where it's like, and I guess speaking of the human element is AI going to take away my job? And I think it's also kind of understanding, that academic advising is more than just let's plan out your courses. There's so much more involved in it. But do you still kind of get that question from individuals or they're concerned that this is going to take away their job or the less amount of advisors that will be hired?
Oh, yes. I think we would. That is a very common question. I think the question is also perhaps somewhat driven by what we're seeing in not just in higher education, but in other industries, right, where technology can easily be seen as a substitute. But I think it sort of is missing the context of like what advising in education is really, right? That there is an aspect of building connections, engagement, providing care, providing support, providing encouragement, which are not areas that technology should be involved with, right? So it's important to have that like boundary really, I think, where what are the areas technology is great at and can help support with planning, organization, but at the same time drawing that boundary. And I think I always take this approach of like providing education on the topic, right? Which is, I think that's what anyone having that conversation on campus, right, should have the vocabulary or understanding of helping easily communicate that these are areas that technology is great at, can really help us move things to that next step. But I think on the other side, these are areas that humans or people have to be integrated, right? Because if Arjun, for example, is debating between 3 different career paths and is anxious and not sure, a chatbot can prompt you as much, but that's not something that's going to get solved just through a chatbot, right?
Yeah.
It does require a discussion with an advisor or someone who can really help the student figure out the nuances of like what's holding them back also from that option, right? Because I think I hear this often where even if I look back at my experiences on this topic, like my family or peers recommended me to maybe move into a finance major because I was good at mathematics. But within that space, there are like hundreds of occupations, right? And I think until you don't have exposure to those, you're not going to take that chance because maybe someone in your network has not done that, right? Advising can really help someone make that decision. It's not so much about your background, it's much more about like where you want to go and like do you have the skills to actually get there.
Absolutely. I mean, based on what you just said, is there anything else that you think higher ed professionals maybe in general misunderstand about AI?
I think there's like two bigger themes there. So the first theme is that AI can do the job of advisors, right? That's sort of I look at a myth, really, which is I think we should not start with that lens. And I think teams that are not doing advising, we hear that question a lot, that advising can be automated by a chatbot, right? So some education there would be helpful. I think the second part of that is much more from an implementation standpoint that you also brought up earlier, which is technology is often so complex, fragmented. So is that the expectation to have, right? And I think teams should really challenge vendors, right? About like things should be made simple. Like it should not take 3 to 5 months to launch something. As well as I think what I'm seeing right now on this specific topic, right, is advisors are often building their chatbots and launching it or sharing it with students or with other campus partners. I think being in sort of the AI space, like there is much more nuances and consequences to that, right? And if I really double click into a couple of things that teams should be aware about, is that building a chatbot that can answer common questions, great. But then you also have to think about who is responsible for managing this for the next 6 to 9 months. Are you going to be updating it? I don't know if advisors have that time. I think additionally, like if student information or certain sensitive questions are added, is this chatbot or system going to expose it to a more public domain, right? And I think we're seeing a lot of lawsuits and regulations around this topic that the general purpose AI systems have access to this information and will not ask before using it also, right? I think there's a need to have a much more restricted way to do these tasks, support these workflows. And then lastly, sort of maybe similar part of this implementation or technology aspect, I think we also need to sort of be better, I see, at connecting the dots of this is an institutional priority and an initiative, and a siloed chatbot will not be seen by often administration or leadership as a key requirement, right? It has to be something that's organizational, which requires a different approach to scaling this type of support or tool.
Yeah, totally agree with that. So I'm interested really also about if you could tell me more about you being the founder of Advisor AI. Tell me more about Advisor AI. What's the history behind this?
For sure. So my background, right, like I think the AI technology experiences as well as the impact of advising is really what motivated me to move in this direction 3 or 4 years ago. And it's interesting when someone asks me like, what is Advisor AI and what we do now? Because 4 years ago, we started with a very simple major exploration assessment. So a business student could like answer a couple of questions. They would get recommendations of, okay, you could take finance, map certain labor market data, marketing, and then you go sort of discuss those results with an advisor. Very different to what we do now. And I think a lot of that to where I'm heading with, what we do now is informed by what me and the team have learned in the last 4 years, which is, I think students have cited it's not difficult to navigate all the resources that are on the website, the catalog, the career pages. Advisors have also often shared they're having to manage so many different systems, resources. It's often not saving time to focus on the tasks that are critical, that are part of high quality advising. And so based on those conversations, experiments, what we are now is, it is really a AI native student success and advising platform. And so the 3 pillars to look at it would be, it is something students can use from when they're pre-enrollment, so exploring options to decide, is this the right program major for me? And then once they're enrolled, really a system that can help them be accountable moving through each term of academic planning, career resources, institutional resources. Sometimes I may not even know like a campus resource or a social media certificate was available. So providing that early exposure, while at the same time, academic advisors, career services, student success, faculty are integrated into the process, right? Because a student also doesn't know who to meet with and when to meet with a career advisor. And they are, again, a critical part of what high quality support infrastructure looks like. So it is really helping not just the student navigate options, but also helping the teams be part of that process at every step in a just highly efficient manner, right? Through chatbots and case management tools and other approaches.
I love that. Is there anything that you can say in terms of like what makes Advisor AI maybe different from other AI platforms that might be being used, let's just say within higher ed?
For sure. So I think we're seeing campuses from not just the US, but even from countries in Australia and Middle East and Europe also reaching out. And what's often emerging is probably in like 4 or 5 key themes. So the first area is really the evidence-based approach. So we have integrated the system and implemented the system using a lot of the best practices from appreciative advising, from National Association of Colleges and Employers, from the feedback we have gotten from like 200 plus campuses in the last sort of 3-4 years, right? About what is high quality advising, career exploration, milestone-driven pathways, having more secure, sustainable infrastructure, case management support, intervention tools, right? So what are those things that work, but in a much more unified manner? It's often fragmented. I think the second part is, and partly I think your question from earlier around implementation, it should not take 6 or 9 months to launch and train teams. Like our processes that it's fairly simple. Teams take about 10 or 15 hours at most. They launch within the first month. We have advisors cross-training different departments where we are not involved at all because it's so simple to use. So advising team is just sharing it with the career services team. I think what I've heard is that's pretty rare because typically it requires multiple Zoom calls or multiple workshops. This is a 30-minute training session. Here's how to do the tasks, and then teams can sort of build off of it. I think the third part, again, ethical, responsible AI is, not just I see something we see on a webinar, but a foundation, right? It's sort of built in from day one, which is if I ask questions about mental health, the system will just not respond to it. You will route it to like an academic advisor or like any resource available because this is meant to help with the academic career exploration aspects really, and not give advice on the critical nature of advising, right? So we really understand the boundary, which actually helps lower the level of risk, as well as integrate the right people across the process.
Yeah, I'm just kind of thinking like from my own experience and what others might end up saying, where they might say, well, I'll believe it when I see it, because sometimes with the like implementation of like, here's this new product, now we're going to train you, now go train everybody else. And then that takes like you were saying, sometimes these things go like 6-9 months, if not longer. But in my experience, what ended up happening with a certain product, I won't name what it is, but when we got trained on it, and then it was like, okay, Matt, you and these 4 other individuals will now be responsible for training other departments. We're going to peace out. Let us know if you have questions. And then once it went live, like there was all these bugs, and we had to put tickets in to get things resolved. And then that ended up taking weeks. And then the people we were training were like, why are we going to use this product now? Because you guys can't even get it right the first time.
I think at this point I've heard that same sentiment at least 100 times from different campuses about their experiences. And I think that is really what informed like where we have focused a lot, right? So the implementation should be made easy, which is it is done by our team, right? So just for that context, right, where advising teams should not be like entering data, mapping resources, right? They understand the domain and they understand the context of the institution, and so they should be directing the resources as well as pointing out what is accurate or not. And we really partner with teams from that lens of like, what does success actually mean for you up front, so that 6 months out, right, you're not like, well, we launched a system, we still don't know what the use cases are, what it's going to help with. That just never works out, right, for the advising teams, for the students, for the administrators. And so I think sort of goes to my experience of like backwards design approach, and how this system is also technically built with that foundation of, if students have a plan up front, if advisors have the data and resources up front, if the implementation process is done up front, right, a lot of things can be made simple and streamlined.
Now, you were mentioning kind of like within the system, like it's if it's like a mental health concern question, it would kind of get rerouted. I guess going along with kind of around that, a lot of with academic advising can be highly local, policy heavy, what I would consider like a lot of gray area that we work in. So a lot of, exceptions that could be made. How would you help, or how should others that might be at a campus take that into account when they think of implementing something with AI?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the AI system, right? Like what it actually is doing. I can share from our context, which is when we partner with community colleges right now. So we're working with their teams on like, what are those local policies? What are those frequently asked questions that you could maybe save some time on, right? But then also understanding from them, like, what are the areas that you don't want a system to like answering, or you want to give a disclaimer up front. Example for that would be like, if a topic, so we have like high school students going into community colleges, that is one cohort really, right, where high school students may not be eligible for certain types of scholarships, right? And so we need to give a disclaimer up front. If the student starts asking about financial aid, how can a response be suggested about, you are not eligible? Even though the resources do exist on the website, you do need some sort of direction or disclaimer there, right? And part of that implementation can be set up in a way that this local policy or department level knowledge is embedded into the system, so that when Arjun asks about financial aid as a high school student, I get the right answer and I can go explore it further. And if I am enrolled and I ask about a certain topic, I get the right answer.
And you were mentioning, like, with, let's say, success, that you're asking these teams like up front what that would look like. how do you help these teams kind of look at success in the terms of like the first 90 days or 6 months, a year, like a year after that?
Yeah, so I sort of again start off with who are the teams we're working with. So, is it admissions from an enrollment standpoint? Is it academic advising from just building more consistent experiences, student graduation, retention outcomes? Or is it career services teams from the more workforce readiness, integrating career planning into curriculum? Like, what are the main objectives and who are the teams? And then map out that 6, 9, 12-month roadmap. So example there would be that typically a milestone for the first 4 to 6 weeks is really to get the system set up with the core information that's required about advising, common topics, career resources, so that by the 90-day term, at least an experiment can be conducted and some initial feedback and data can be captured. And so with one of the colleges, like we did like a workshop on career exploration, had a couple hundred students engage, ask questions, and now the team had data about that this workshop was effective. And so they can now expand it to other groups and cohorts in the next 3-month term. And so the 6-month timeline, or I would say like a milestone, would be that you have a repeatable foundation, a case study that can be shared with other departments, so that you're sort of adding up really, which is you're not building up the foundations again. You're finding the insight from case study 1 by month 3 and 6. Then you're replicating it with multiple departments by that month 9. And ideally, like if that process is taken and the teams, the people, the process, and the technology are aligning, right? That's sort of the 3 lenses I look at things to sort of make it successful. By month 12, this could expand to that every department across the institution is embedding the holistic advising approach, right? Where every student has a clear plan, not just academically, but from a career lens. All the resources are mapped. Advisors have all the right information. And I think that's what success is, which is a gradual, intentional build-up to scaling high-quality support.
Yeah, no, I definitely appreciate that answer and the fact that there would be benchmarks in there, because I think sometimes some departments think of success as like, well, we implement it, check off the list, move on to something else.
Yeah, I think, again, we sort of take a very collaborative and meaningful approach, which is we don't want just a system to also be implemented, right? That's not a measure of success. Like if it's not helping the student, if it's not helping the advisor, then I think it requires a conversation around like what needs to be addressed, right? Because I think, especially with the shifts in education right now, where there is significant accountability standards, standards are also evolving rapidly about what needs to get prioritized and what needs to get deprioritized. I think taking a strategic approach to any project, right, any implementation is highly recommended, because 6 months out, these projects will be questioned, and they are getting questioned. I think at least we see this almost every week right now. Like every current solution Teams has is getting questioned.
Which I think is good. You always want to be questioning and reflecting back on it. Which actually, with speaking of reflection, you were talking about from when Advisor AI started to now, you made some pivots, you made some changes. Have you learned anything about yourself through this whole time with Advisor AI through these years?
Well, I think maybe the biggest lesson I would say in the last 4 or 5 years is much more like going in with this lens of that technology can help address, I think, the sort of data and reports you're seeing from the student lens and high stress, and also like insights from advisors that we've captured that technology could help address 80% of these challenges, right? And I think what my thinking has sort of shifted to, and a bigger realization is that technology is really like 20-30% of the challenge, right? I think the other two components there that I previously mentioned are the people and the process, right? So from a people perspective, like how are advisors appreciated and have the right resources and have the right training and also recognized for what they're doing from the level of impact to the institution. That has to have more better infrastructure, right? Especially now, I sort of look at if technology is making teams more productive, more effective, there should be more appreciation also from the institutional lens there. And then third piece there is the process, right? Like people can be highly skilled, technology can be effective and modern, but you also need to have very clear processes in place, which is when should a student engage in career exploration? When should they create a holistic plan, right? It's sort of like if we just have a solution available on a website, no one's just going to actively sort of engage with those systems or resources, right? It has to be made a process because I think advising is not an optional exercise, right? I think it is critical to someone's success personally, professionally, and it should really be treated as that. I think some schools have it optional, some have it mandatory. And so I think that's a big insight probably for myself and just how things are shifting, right? From the conversations is people, process, and technology. I think all three play a critical role in success of any initiative.
No, perfectly said. Now, by the time someone's listening to this, hopefully it's when it is published towards the end of May, you have some webinars coming up, right?
Yeah, I would love to briefly share a mention of that. So again, over the last 3 years, from our conversations with campuses nationwide, also globally, from what teams are sharing from advising, admissions, career services, through multiple partnerships that we've built up over the last couple of years, we have curated a series of topics to help share what are the minimum requirements for different departments in driving success, while also demystifying the myths around technology. And so there's sort of 4 lenses to this. We've completed a couple of the admissions-related webinars. Right now, we're going through a lot of the advising and career services-related topics. So what is a high-quality career ecosystem? How should teams embed advising or AI-driven advising systems from enrollment to graduation? And then the last part of sessions close to June, sort of the time frame, will be around a lot of the topics actually that we have discussed today, which is what are the stages of a successful implementation? What are the metrics? How should teams really evaluate a system's success upfront, right? Like what are those key questions to ask so that 6 months out or 12 months out, teams are not at the point of, well, we checked it off, right? And I don't know who's using it. So those are some of the topics, and they're weekly on Thursdays. The link to register is also on our homepage of the website if anyone is interested when they do listen to this.
Awesome. And this is an academic advising podcast. We have many higher ed professionals, from advisors, peers, administrators, various roles. If you could sum up this conversation that we had today, what would you want to tell listeners?
So I think my biggest lesson from this conversation, and the conversations I feel I'm having almost every week, is twofold. Firstly, with any AI system, any conversation, really try to map out those three aspects of people, process, and technology. I think setting up that foundation will drive much better success on the student success objectives most institutions have, and how teams are also integrated at every step. I think secondly, it sort of goes with this lens of like do less, which is I think what I'm hearing often is teams are trying to do so many things, so many initiatives, but there are 4 or 5 key best practices that have been proven over the last like decades, right, about what works. And so given just operational constraints in this conversation, it's really about focusing on what drives excellence. What are those 4 or 5 activities that contribute significantly to student success? And don't try to do all the other 80%.
And last question, we ask guests this on many of our episodes. With everything that you have going on, everything on your plate, all the conversations you're having, what do you do for your wellness?
That's a good question. I think I'm a big proponent of taking walks. So I would say that's my like recommendation there. I think we're in a interesting stage of transitions in education and advising. So I think I'm always someone who thinks things can be done better, right? So I'm sure I can find a way, but I think a wellness approach partially here is also to just be more accepting of the situations. I think that's like partly what I've learned also.
All right. Well, great way to end it. Arjun, this was a fantastic conversation, very meaningful as always. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much, Matt, for having me on your podcast. Really enjoyed the conversation, and I've seen a lot of great, engaging conversations previously. So glad to be part of the series.